Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is Fist of Awesome. Can you see where they're going with it? Maybe. It's by a company called I Fight Bears. A company that I feel only exists for this game and probably will not exist after it. Whatever the case, it was a Kickstarter title. They weren't asking for a huge amount for it. They actually doubled the amount that they were asking. And eventually made it through Greenlight after a successful Android release and then brought it out on PC. Unfortunately, what they didn't bring to PC was the enhanced edition they were kind of going to do, because they required, I think, £12,000 to do that, and they didn't raise that much. So, from what I can tell, the PC version does appear to basically be the same as the Android version, with the obvious exception of the fact that you can use real controllers and not just pour all over the screen. Outside of that, though, it doesn't have much going for it. Let's find the options menu. There isn't one. There's just a song about bears. No, seriously.
Sometimes it might feel like humanity is being crushed by rampaging bears. Sometimes it may seem like dinosaurs will grip your body and tear it to pieces. Sometimes celestial intervention delivers you almighty friends. He's got time, he's got travel, he's got timber. God burns back till the day he dies. He's the fist of awesome, yeah.
Quite enough of that. That's quite enough of the— oh god, it won't stop, will it? That's quite enough of that. That's quite silly. That's the second best thing about the game. These are the controls. You can rebind them if you wish. They're fairly simple. Nothing to really worry about too much there. What it doesn't tell you is the key combinations for the special moves. In fact, it tells you that nowhere. I'll look to see if there was a manual for it. There isn't. So, eventually you'll figure some out. I can show you one of them that I can do, no problem at all, because that's quite easy. There's another one, which is basically a Hadouken. Or is it Shoryuken? It would be a Shoryuken. It would not be a Hadouken. I got that very, very wrong indeed. A Shoryuken is in the game, and then there's this big fist punch, whatever. What is it anyway? It's like, you're probably very confused at this point, and I don't blame you in any way. It's a side-scrolling pixel retro brawler that is mostly about bad bear puns and some jokes. The world has been taken over by bears due to a time paradox. The Fist of Awesome has possessed your body and nervous system, and you, the heroic lumberjack, will go and beat up all the bears in order to fix the space-time continuum and so on and so forth. This is how you do it. You do it by punching them, because it's a brawler. It's a side-scrolling brawler. So, let's beat up some bears. This is how you do it. You hit the buttons and the bears fall down. There is a stomp move, which can, of course, be used when the bear is on the ground. There is a rapid punch combination. There is a kick, which allows you to stun the bear and then grab it and then throw it around if you so desire. And there is also a back kick. There's also a special move. Well, there's actually two that I know of anyway. You hold down the S button for that one. Takes a little bit of time, but it's a lot of damage and pretty much guaranteed knockback. There's also a flying kick, as there is in pretty much every brawler game known to man. And there is that kind of Shoryuken move, which I can't do because I don't know how. I do it accidentally once in a while. I'm not really sure how, but it's a thing that happens. Now, as you go through the levels, you'll level up, and you have 4 basic characteristics that can be leveled up. The speed, your health, your attack power, and the power of your specials. As you can see in the corner, you've got a health bar. It does regenerate, and that is for the best, because there is no counter or block button anywhere, unless they have managed to hide that. So what that means is you're going to end up being in situations where you end up being stun locked and taking a ton of damage. So thankfully, the regenerating health system allows you to— it just allows the game to compensate for that, because frankly, it's a bad design decision, let's be totally honest with you. You can avoid a lot of it, but every now and again, of course, there's a big swarm of enemies, and they're pretty difficult to deal with. There's no dash button to get away from them either. The best thing you can kind of do is just kind of hammer the jump button and hope to get away. It's really as simple as that. There we go. I will say that, for the most part, I think the dialogue is fairly amusing. if you're into that kind of humor. And that's obviously going to be highly subjective. A lot of bear puns and things like that. I think there's definitely a decent amount of sort of internet-esque humor. No kind of direct references as far as I can tell, but it is very sort of lol so random, purple monkey dishwasher internet humor. It's like, you know what would be great? Fighting bears, because bears, and yeah, you get it, bears. The internet likes bears and things related to bears. That's, you know, it's just how it is. Could be cat puncher and the internet would hate it. You get the idea. But let's break the game down to what it actually is. The actual mechanics and things like the level design, enemy variety, and so on and so forth. Well, the mechanics are extremely basic, as you've probably figured out already. There are a few different moves, there's a couple of specials, and outside of that, you're going to be beating up the same enemies over and over again. It's actually one of the biggest problems I've got with it. I think I'm about 5 or 6 levels in at this point, and almost every enemy is a reskin of this bear, right? There is the security bears, the bears in black, and they can do pretty much the same thing, but they replace their arm thrashy special move with what do they call those? The neuralizer? Yeah, just the neuralizer, which will knock you down. And there's several kinds of bears that do the same sort of moves as this with the whole spinning arms thing, but they do more damage as you go through the game. So you want to keep like updating your health stat to make sure that you don't get stun locked to death. Can certainly happen. Outside of that, there's some deer in the first mission, which have yet to be seen again, and there's velociraptors, which they're all pretty much the same enemy, right? They just have a different special move. They all pretty much act the same. I wouldn't say they're necessarily reskins of the same sort of sprite, but the bears definitely are. There's no real doubt about that. And you can actually play as them in the arena mode, which is exactly what it sounds like. You go into an arena, you complete various objectives, which it pops up at you, which, by the way, obscure the screen, which is extremely annoying. I hate that. Same with the achievements in this game. They pop up and cover up half the screen, so you can't see what's going on. Then you get beaten up by bears. It's pretty terrible. But whatever the case, they pretty much handle it exactly the same way as the main character does. So there's nothing really all that surprising there. I actually haven't seen a single enemy with a ranged attack yet. But the biggest problem I've got with it, really, in terms of enemy variety, is not the fact that the grunts sort of do the same thing, and they do. It's the fact that the bosses do the same thing. So every now and again, you're going to be given a bear fight, which is the boss fight. I think I've done 4 of them so far, maybe 3. They have all done the same thing every single time. They've just done more damage, yeah? They have this sort of stomp on wake up, which knocks over enemies as well as you, and outside of that, they do this big punch, which does a decent amount of damage, knocks you over, and that's it. They're all exactly the same. And it's the lack of variety in the fighting that really makes this game dull, because you're going to be spending all your time doing this and occasionally reading a pun about bears. And I'm sorry, that isn't, for me, enough to keep me playing. This is the second weird parody retro brawler that we got. The other one was Fist Puncher. Fist Puncher had some similar problems in the way that it was just highly repetitive. I would say that this game's a little bit less spammy, certainly. The attacks are easier to predict, but you can't block them or anything like that. So it's just a case of keep enemies at a distance, make sure you don't get surrounded, and walk around a little bit at a slight angle to make sure that the bears can't engage you. So you can regenerate your health, and then you kind of go back and do it again. So it's an extremely basic version of things like Final Fight or Streets of Rage. And how do games like Final Fight and Streets of Rage really keep things going? Well, they have a larger variety of enemies, they have a larger variety of moves, which is very, very important. They just have more complex systems in general. They have some really nice co-op features, which this game seems to lack. They were promising a co-op mode if they reached a certain landmark in their actual Kickstarter, but they never did. Alright, here's another bear fight. Let's see if this one actually does different stuff. I have a feeling all it's going to do is summon a bunch of mobs, and then I'm going to knock it over. Yep, it's going to hit me pretty hard, and then on wake up it's going to do the big kind of knock-up thing. Yep, it does. There we go. So, yeah, it's exactly the same as all the other bosses. They just summon a slightly different mob, which will keep spawning until you kill the bear. So the whole real point is just knock the bear over a couple of times, try and make him do damage to his own dudes. It's just an easier way of clearing things out, and that's kind of it. That's every boss fight up to this point in this game. And, you know, you could say, all right, well, it's just the first impressions. Maybe it gets a little bit more various later on. But really, if you're going to have 4 or 5 boss fights that are identical, I think it's kind of safe to say that most of the other boss fights in the game are going to be fairly similar. Even if they weren't, it's not really acceptable to have the same fight 5 times in a row, especially when your game has nothing else going for it. Other things that things like Final Fight and Streets of Rage did to keep things interesting were the addition of weapons. So occasionally you get a weapon which would really shake up the way that the combat actually worked. It also had things like resource management in terms of both the weapons and the health pickups. You had to be careful there. You had a special which either had limited ammo in Streets of Rage 1 or drained health in Streets of Rage 2. And there's nothing like that here. So you can kind of see why there would be a bit of a difference between those old classic brawlers of old. That's, wow, yeah, you know what, that's what we're going to call them from here on in. The old classic brawlers of old. I like that. We could put a ye in front of that, maybe a verily, just to really make things awesome. But the fact of the matter is that those games, even though they were fairly simplistic, had more complex systems built into them that made the games more interesting. And they also had a lot of things like boss variety, even though they reskinned enemies from time to time. They did have good boss variety, good level variety. I will say that the creativity behind these levels is pretty funny. You know, the first one starts off in a forest, and then there's one in Bear Hatton, which is kind of a city which has various interesting, amusing bear jokes, including a bear strip club, which you don't get to go in and fight in, which, again, you know, that'll be a nice bit of variety that they could have added to the game there, and they didn't. It's like a human zoo, then you go back in time and fight velociraptors, and then you're in this cave, and you get the idea. Nice amount of variety there, but you don't interact with the levels in any way, and all the levels are identical. There's not even any kind of obstacles in your way, so really they're just backgrounds. So it's not really all that relevant. And that's basically what this game is outside of the arena mode. So really, it's difficult to justify any price tag for a game like this. This is the kind of funny concept that you put into a free Flash game and say, hey, let's go. I'm not a huge fan of the aesthetic, but really you can take it or leave it. It doesn't look as hideous as something like Fist Puncher did, which seemed like it was looking deliberately bad. This at least has a certain degree of style to it, although obviously it's not particularly well drawn. Although I will say I did have a couple of laughs at some of the animations. In particular, the deer, the way that they walk is actually extremely funny. So I kind of dig the way that they did that. So they've got a decent amount of sense of humor with it. But outside of that, I'm not really a huge fan of the aesthetic. I will say that I like the soundtrack a lot, and I thought this sounds quite familiar. And there was a reason, because it's actually by Cyphus, also known as Echo Space. And he did the music for a game whose soundtrack was absolutely phenomenal by the name of Pineapple Smash Crew. The soundtrack to this game is easily the best thing about it. I would actually prefer to buy the soundtrack on its own than buy the game, because the game is fairly monotonous and is unfortunately not carried by its theme and humor due to its fairly simplistic systems and repetitive levels. But the music is really, really good. I actually enjoyed it an awful lot. Now, you'd like me to let you listen to a little bit, wouldn't you? Yes, of course you would. So it's maybe not the best track to listen to. I don't think this is as good as some of the really cool tracks in the first few levels, but I'll let you listen to it anyway. Yeah, it's pretty good. Now, what you would have also noticed, I think, while you were listening to that, is the sound effects. Now, it seems like they just recorded all the sound effects themselves. Yeah, it uses someone just shouting. And in fact, when you punch a bear repeatedly, its damage sound is just him saying bear, bear, bear over and over again. Which is kind of funny-ish, but the joke wears thin very quickly. And you notice it's the same enemies. Like, this is just another type of bear, and his special attack is actually identical to the other ones. They just changed the animation on it. So, you know, I'm sorry, but it's not enough to carry the game. We get it. It's a funny joke, haha. But I want to see more enemy variety. I want this experience to be fun when it comes to brawling. And I like brawling games a lot, actually. And of course, the spiritual successor to that, the third-person action character game, or the spectacle fighter. But this is just really, really repetitive. Like, insanely so. It's actually fairly easy as well. When you die, it generally comes down to the fact that you've been stun-locked in a corner by a bunch of enemies. Outside of that, as long as you can get out of the scrum, you can regenerate your health just mostly by walking sideways at a diagonal in order to try and avoid the enemies. But you see what I mean there? Basically down to 0 health just through a stun lock. And it really seems to come down to luck more so than anything else as to whether or not you get stun locked. As if they knock you over, then you can easily get back up and regenerate all your health again just by walking diagonally to escape them. But if they keep punching you, you will just die. So it's not particularly well designed, and the deaths do feel cheap, but there's entire levels where you can go through and not feel threatened at all, because again, all the enemies do the same thing, and using the same sort of combos against those enemies over and over again is extremely effective. And then you'll just randomly die for no reason because a couple of bears got a hold of you and just hitting you over and over again, but not knocking you to the floor. And there's no counter system, block system, or escape system in the game. So, yeah. Not very well designed game, I'm afraid. Now, it's kind of cute. I'd certainly play it for about an hour for free. Absolutely. If it were freeware or flash game or something like that, I would not recommend paying for it. And the arena mode isn't really enough to keep me in the game either, but I will certainly purchase the soundtrack if it's available. Because like I say, it was actually fantastic. In fact, if we go back to the main menu, you'll notice just how good the soundtrack is. See what I mean? It's good. I mean, I like Cyphers' work anyway, so that was to be expected, but yeah, the soundtrack is absolutely fantastic. We'll go to arena mode just to show you how it works. So, you got a bunch of unlockable characters. These, I believe, are actually all the enemies I've pretty much fought here. I assume all of these will probably do the same thing. Now, they do have individual level bars, so you can kind of level up a character that you want and go and do more arenas and things like that. But all of these bears, for the most part, do the same thing. We'll pick Scratchy the Velociraptor, and then we can just pick one of the levels. I imagine this is how many levels there are left in the game. Not a huge number. After about an hour, or easily about, I think, halfway through the game by the looks of it. We'll do it on the. We'll do it in the zoo. There we go. And this has got some good music. Now I'll just let you listen to this. I'm sorry, this is more of a let's listen to Cyphers' awesome soundtrack experience than it is any kind of critique. But enjoy. It really is. Shame the game doesn't really, unfortunately, live up to the soundtrack there. Yeah, so that's Fist of Awesome. It's not very expensive. I'll give them credit for that. In the launch week sale, which is on, I think, for the next few days, it's about $6.50 or your regional equivalent. It's also on Android for about half that price. But again, the game is, in my opinion, far too repetitive in almost every respect, like both in terms of the mechanics and the enemy variety, to really justify any real-time playing it. Which is a shame. I think it's perhaps too reliant on its hara aren't we funny concept and occasionally pretty good humor, and they sort of forgot to put a good game in there to match up to that. It's a shame, but frankly, did we expect anything else? You know, I think it was obvious from the very outset, just looking at it, exactly what kind of game it could have been. But it also could have been so much more than that, you know? Nobody is stopping you from making an extremely funny game and attaching a very good combat system to it. See, I don't know, Castle Crashers is probably a pretty good example of that. Now, that's a good brawler, albeit somewhat repetitive. with a really great sense of humor, excellent level design, and good variety as well, you know. If you look at even games like Streets of Rage, you're dealing with like levels on a bridge where there's a bunch of motorcyclists, so you have to change up your strategy there. If you look at Castle Crashers, they vary it up almost every level. There's all sorts of things going on with that game that you have to do. But Fist of Awesome doesn't really do any of that, so I think it fails the basic test of what makes a decent brawler, unfortunately. But the soundtrack's great, so go and support Cyphers for his amazing soundtrack. If you can buy it, I'll put a link in the description below this video. I'm going to go search for it now. Otherwise, I guess I'm going to rip it out of the game files. My name's been TotalBiscuit. Take a look at Fist of Awesome. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.